What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. In today's video, I'm actually doing a remake of some older videos that I've done in the past that I want to consolidate into a useful video for you guys to be able to reference if you are trying to improve your defense within Madden. Now, we're on Madden 22 today, and we're going to be talking about a few basic and I would say major tips that will help to improve your defensive play immediately within Madden, especially Madden 22. Now, these tips are not going to be strictly gameplay related. They're also going to be related to roster composition and things like that. So make sure you guys pay attention to everything that I have to say in today's video, because there are details that will help you play better on defense by building your roster and doing the right management things to set yourself up for success. The first thing that I want to talk about in today's video is I want to talk about the general mindset of what we want to be doing on defense, especially against the CPU. Now, this also runs for against users. However, users are played differently because they are generally more pass heavy. What I will say is that regardless of whether I play a user or I play a CPU, but especially if I play a CPU, I am aiming to stop the run on early downs. Now, that is basically tried and true for every Madden for the past 5-10 years. You can try to play to stop the run, and if you can successfully do that, you're going to set yourself up for a ton more success, especially stopping the CPU, because it's the way football works. If you stop the run on early downs and you put the opposing offense into more difficult situations, they're going to have less likelihood of converting on those difficult situations. It's certainly easier to convert a 2nd and 5 or a 3rd and 3 than it is to convert on a 2nd and 9 or a 3rd and 8. That's just basic logic, and that is something that we have to implement into our defense in terms of how we build our defense and how we run our defense if we're trying to improve how we play on that side of the ball. With that being said, we're going to talk about roster composition. Now, the first thing that I want to show you guys is today we are on our Pittsburgh Steelers team in the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise. I am on the Steelers defense right now, and you guys can see we run a 3-4 defense as the Pittsburgh Steelers, but right now we're out of alignment in a 4-3 set. And there's a couple of reasons why I want to do this for you guys today. The first reason is I want you guys to understand the difference between a base 4-3 and a 3-4 defense, which is going to be a heavy amount of your play calling, especially if you utilize coach suggestions and you don't take time to pick your plays and things like that. You're going to spend a lot of time in your base formations. On top of that, if you guys are aiming to stop the run, you should spend a ton of time in your base formations on 1st and 2nd down, as well as short yardage downs, because those are going to be the times where you have the right personnel on the field, the heavier personnel, in order to be able to stop the run. So the first thing that we have to understand with our team is how are we actually setting up our defense in terms of our scheme? Well, if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, or if I'm any team that has similar personnel to this, I need to make a choice to recognize that my best pass rusher is an outside linebacker, and that player needs to either be playing a defensive end position in the 4-3 or outside linebacker in the 3-4. So technically speaking, we have this defense aligned incorrectly right now. I'm going to leave it that way for a moment before we align it to a 3-4 based on our personnel and the correct way to align this defense, so that I can talk a little bit about what I do in a 4-3 defense if I do run one. Again, I wanted to emphasize the fact that we are trying to stop the run first and foremost, because that's going to set us up for the most success. Well, if we want to stop the run, how do we do that? The first thing that I always focus on when trying to stop the run and trying to build my defense in general on Madden is I focus on the defensive line first. Before I look at linebackers, before I look at the secondary, I'm always looking to build the defensive line. Now, the reason for that is your defensive line is going to eat up blocks and potentially shed blocks that are going to be crucial in preventing the run from going anywhere. Your two most important players in a 4-3 defense in Madden are very often going to be your interior defensive linemen, because you need them to be disruptive in the run game time and allow your linebackers to come up and make tackles. If these guys are getting blown off the ball, if they can't ever shed a block, then they're not going to be doing you any favors. I always look at these guys as run stoppers first, as interior defensive linemen, whether I'm in a 3-4 or a 4-3 defense, because I need guys that can get off blocks and guys that can eat up blocks and allow that run game to be effective on the defensive side of the ball. Now, that's a deviation from what a lot of people do. A lot of people like to have pass rushers in a 4-3 defense on the interior. I don't. I look at the run first. And if they do have pass rushing abilities, that's great, but I just simply look at that as a bonus on top of their run stopping ability. Next up is the defensive ends in a 4-3 system. These, again, are players that I would look to as run stopping players. Now, again, that's a deviation from a traditional 4-3 system. In a traditional 4-3 system, these are going to be your pass rushers. These are the players that are going to have those one-on-one matchups on the edge with the offensive tackles to try to get to the quarterback. Now, again, that's great. I like to have pass rushers at these defensive end positions, but if my goal is to stop the run and I only have 2 defensive run stoppers on the inside, where do we think the opponent is going to be able to run the ball against me? More than likely, they're going to be able to run it on the edge because these players in traditionally 4-3 sets are not going to be effective run stoppers. And opponents know that. They know that these players are generally going to be speed rushers. They're going to get themselves out of position because of that. They're not effective at playing the run. And therefore you're going to be able to get the edge and run off tackle. That's extremely important to know, and that's why very often I will recruit interior defensive linemen in a 4-3 system and move them to defensive end so that I have 4 very solid run stoppers up front, and then that is going to allow the rest of my players, my linebackers and my safeties, to come down and make the necessary tackles. Again, I just want to mention that that is a deviation from the way that these defenses are typically run in real life. Even when I coach football in real life, I do not coach them this way because it does not work the same as it does in Madden. In Madden, it is more effective to have 4 run stoppers a lot of the time, and people don't realize that the run game is truly what is preventing them from having success on the defensive side of the ball. I recommend you guys at least give it a try and see what you guys think. You might like it, you might dislike it, and see what you guys can do. I also blitz a lot, so I generate pressure from other areas than my edge rushers. So next up here, I'm going to go ahead and switch my defense to what it should be, which would be a disguised 3-4 or some variation of the 3-4. And then I'm going to find a playbook that I like to run with this defense, something that is going to give me some flexibility. Now, what I'll say is, like I said, this should be a main 3-4 defense, but that doesn't mean you can't also have a 4-3 set out of it. If you have personnel that you like to utilize there, I recommend having that multiple. And you have to find a playbook that includes a heavy formation. For example, in Washington's playbook, they have the 4-6. Some other playbooks will contain a 4-4. Some other players will contain a 5-2. For example, you have to have that type of a formation so that on first down, you can utilize that formation to stop the run. It is a formation that is going to give you an advantage if you know that the opponent's stopping the run. This is particularly useful against the CPU or against users that like to run the football because you are giving yourself a heavy advantage with more heavy bodies and run-stopping players in the box against an offense that is not going to be able to block all of those heavier players. Now, if we head back to the defense here, you guys can see we're now aligned appropriately in a 3-4. Again, in a 3-4, I like to have 3 run-stuffing players that might have pass rushing ability as a bonus, like a Cam Hayward or a Stephon Tuitt. And then on the outside, I like to have edge rusher type of players. But one thing that I will say is that I focus on upgrading these players in the run-stuffing categories more than most players would. And the reason being for that is they are there to hold the edge for me, and the ability to stop the run on defense is contingent on these players being able to get off their blocks and keep contained, as well as be disruptive in the run game. So I like to have 5 run-stopping players here that are going to be basically on the line of scrimmage in my 3-4 formation because those linebackers come down to the line of scrimmage a lot of the time. So we're going to have massive amounts of run stopping ability up front that's going to set us up for situations that are favorable to the defense on second and third down. Now, the next thing to talk about here is what do we do with the rest of our players on the defense? Well, your linebackers can be whatever type of linebacker are conducive to your style of defense. Generally speaking, I like these guys to have some amount of athleticism, though I don't mind having a player here that has solid block shedding and can get off a block and help stuff the run earlier than a player like a speedster Devin Bush might be able to because he gets caught on blocks. These types of players are a little bit less important because you can go multiple different directions with them. One thing that I'll say is that especially in Madden 22 with the broken coverages, it's almost useless to have these very good cornerbacks and safeties because they're going to give up catches and they're going to allow touchdowns no matter what because there is poor programming on EA's part. However, in most Maddens, I like to have athletes at these positions, and the reason being for that is the passing game is going to be the hardest thing for you guys to stop. It always is. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to set the other team up in situations that are favorable for us, long yardage situations. Well, in those situations, we want to have athletes that can run with the best of the opposing team and not get lost in the mix because they're too slow or not agile enough to break on the ball. All right, and so the next thing to talk about here is once we're on the field, what should we be looking to do? Well, on first downs, like I said, I have a tendency to call heavy formations on defense, whether it be a 4-6, a 5-2, or my base 3-4/4-3 defense. That is where I like to live. I like to live with these heavier formations on the defensive side of the ball because it gives me the advantage against run plays, as you guys can see on the screen right there. When you have more big bodies up there and players within the tackle box, it's going to make life a lot more difficult on the offense whenever they're trying to run the football against you guys. This is a typical situation where you will see first down, it's going to be a run a majority of the time. So I like to have more players in the box and more players that are capable of coming up and making a play. That's absolutely crucial. Now, the next thing to talk about here is what are we doing in general on the defensive side of the ball? So first down, I'm almost always calling a run stopping type of a defense, a heavy defense. I'm not calling a nickel on first down. But what we do otherwise, other than that, let's say you effectively stop the run on first down, you're going to set them up for a 2nd and 9, a 2nd and 8, a 2nd and 7. And most teams aren't going to run 2 times in a row. Now, if they have success, they might run it. In that case, where you're in a 2nd and 4, a 2nd and 3, you might want to go with a heavy set again, if that situation makes sense. But if you back them up into a situation where they start to bring out 3 wide receivers or 4 wide receivers or maybe even 5 wide receivers, then you have to match personnel. And this is the absolute final tip for this video, and we can get further into depth about this later on in other videos, but matching personnel is absolutely crucial. So on first or second down, even if the opposing team comes out in a 3 wide receiver set, I'm going to make them prove that they can throw the ball against me. Now, there's a saying, and I'm probably not going to be able to quote this word for word, but essentially it goes something like this. When you put the ball in the air, there's a million different things that can happen. If you put the ball in the hands of your running back, there's 2 things that can happen. He's going to get tackled or he's going to fumble the football. There are a lot more bad things that can happen in the air, and that's why it is more advantageous for you as a defense to force the opposing team to have to throw the ball and have to throw the ball for long yardage. So on first down, regardless of if they come out in a 3 wide receiver set or something like that, I'm going to call a 4-3, 3-4, or a heavy defense like a 46 Bear or a 4-4 or something of that nature. Now, if they come out in a 4 wide receiver set or a 5 wide receiver set, then I'm going to switch to something like a nickel, or I'm going to switch to something that has 1 less defensive back on the field than they do, so that I have 1 more run stopping personnel than they have run blocking personnel. And that's the way that I work it in my head. But then once we get to second down and third down situations where we know that the opponent is passing the football, we should be getting into situations where we have the equal number of defensive backs on the field or more defensive backs on the field than they have wide receivers. So if they come out in a 3 wide receiver set, the nickel is going to have 3 corners. That is going to be your man-on-man, or your equal matchup, I should say, because you can run zone out of this as well. That's going to be your equal matchup and your personnel match. If they come out in 4 wide receivers, something like a dollar or a dime is going to be your formation match, your personnel match. Now, if they come out in a third and long situation and they come out in a 2 wide receiver set, are you guys going to come out in a heavy formation? No, not necessarily, because if it's 3rd and 9, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to run the football. So back off into a nickel coverage. Give yourself 1 extra defensive back in comparison to the number of wide receivers and receiving threats that they have out there on the field. Heck, if it's a 3rd and 9, or if it's a 3rd and 10, or 3rd and anything longer than that, I would consider just coming out in a dollar or a dime no matter what, because you're going to have the maximum number of defensive backs on the field. Now, you will limit your pass rush potential, give the quarterback a little bit more time to throw the ball, but that is the general consensus, or my general idea of what I'm going to be doing on the defensive side of the ball situationally and personnel-wise in order to force the defense into, or in order to force the offense into bad situations or force the defense into potentially successful situations. If you start doing these basics from the management tips up through the gameplay personnel matching, you're going to find more success on the defensive side of the ball. I find that very often the problem is people do not know how to build their roster in a way to stop an opposing offense, and that's going to happen if you don't focus on the run stoppers first. There's been, I recall specifically the RDFL league that I was in and that I started. I went into that league for the second time after I took a break from it, and I took over a team that was supposed to be good, and I'm looking at the team, and I'm having no success on defense, and I had to look at the defensive line, and I'm like, why are we completely devoid of talent and run-stopping ability on the defensive line? We were allowing 5 and 6 yards a carry because we just simply couldn't do anything in terms of getting a push or getting off a block. It is absolutely crucial that we focus on stopping the run first and worry about the rest later, because completing a 2nd and 4 situation is much easier than completing a 2nd and 9 or a 2nd and 8. It's a very straightforward concept. So that's all I have for you guys in today's video. Hopefully you found this information useful. Hopefully this video was informative to you. If it was, leave a like on the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll see you guys in the next one, and I hope you have a good one.